I walk into the glass conference room, the navy blue of my suit feeling like armor. In my hand, I hold a single manila folder, its weight both trivial and immense. This is the same room where they laughed at me 6 months ago. The same polished table, the same ergonomic chairs, the same sterile panoramic view of the city that always made me feel so small. No one notices me yet. They are all too busy, their heads bent together in conspiratorial huddles, sipping from white ceramic cups filled with overpriced coffee. Their voices are low, but the malice is sharp enough to cut through the air. They're mocking the new general manager, the mysterious figure summoned by corporate to fix their failing division. I can hear Jacob Ram, the vice president of sales, letting out a braying laugh. He's betting she'll be some clueless executive's wife, given the job as a vanity project. Fiona Leeds, the team lead who always looked through me as if I were made of glass, adds her own venomous little whisper, something about hoping the new boss at least has a decent fashion sense, unlike some people. Their laughter is a familiar ugly sound. It's the same sound I heard them make when they talked about that poor single mom from logistics, the one who cried during the Christmas party after being publicly excluded from the secret bonus pool. That poor single mom was me. They talk about me in the third person, a ghost in their memory, a piece of office lore. They don't know the ghost has come back to haunt them. I shift the folder in my hand, the crisp paper a tangible link to the new reality I've built. I take a steadying breath, letting the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere fill my lungs. Then, I clear my throat. It's not a loud sound, just a small, deliberate scrape of sound in the otherwise murmuring room. Heads turn, one by one. Jacob's smirk falters. Fiona's eyes, which were crinkled in amusement, widen in confusion. Camber Sloan, the head of HR who once told me this office wasn't a daycare, freezes with her cup halfway to her lips. Mouths drop. The quiet, confident hum of their gossip sputters and dies, replaced by a thick, gaping silence. Their eyes lock on me, standing just inside the doorway. They see the suit, they see the folder, they see the calm on my face, a calm that wasn't there 6 months ago, and in that horrifying, beautiful, stretched-out second, the realization dawns on them, because the new general manager they're waiting for is me. 6 months ago, I was a ghost in this office, a name on a payroll sheet, a problem to be managed. I was the charity hire, the single mom juggling night shifts and daycare drop-offs, the woman whose exhaustion was a constant unspoken joke. They saw my struggles not as a sign of strength, but as a mark of failure. They don't know that while they were taking a company expense trip to Hawaii to celebrate their summer bonuses, I was cashing out a lifetime of careful, desperate savings. They don't know I was on late-night calls with a retired CEO who saw a fighter in me. They don't know that I didn't just start a side business, I built a small, ruthlessly efficient empire, and they certainly don't know that 3 weeks ago, through a shell corporation they'd never heard of, I used the profits from that empire to buy a 52% controlling share of this entire division. After being humiliated at the office Christmas party, after being told I was a nobody, after being mocked for fighting to give my son a decent life, I secretly built a new one for myself. I bought out the very company that belittled me, and I returned as the boss, proving that the most underestimated woman in the room is often the most dangerous. The company Christmas party was held at a downtown hotel ballroom that smelled of money and pine-scented air freshener. Twinkling lights were draped over everything that didn't move, and a string quartet sawed away at festive carols in the corner, their music a polite, elegant veneer over the roar of corporate backpatting. I stood near the entrance, nursing a glass of sparkling water, feeling as out of place as a pigeon at a peacock convention. My dress was simple, black and 2 seasons old, the best I could afford, but it felt like a homespun sackcloth in this sea of designer labels and tailored suits. I could feel the invisible wall between me and them. They were the insiders, the chosen ones, and I was the logistics coordinator, the single mom who worked the night shift, the woman whose presence here felt like an administrative error. I saw Fiona Leeds, my team lead, laughing with a cluster of salespeople, her sequined dress catching the light like a disco ball. She glanced in my direction, her eyes sliding right over me, a subtle, practiced dismissal that was more painful than an outright insult. I tried to join a conversation near the elaborate ice sculpture of our company logo, but the circle closed tighter as I approached, a silent, clear message that I wasn't welcome. The real sting came an hour later. An announcement was made for a special VIP dinner, a private affair for the top performers in an exclusive dining room upstairs. I watched as my colleagues, my supposed team, began to peel away from the main party, their faces alight with smug satisfaction. I knew, without having to ask, that I wouldn't be on that list. Still, a foolish little flicker of hope made me walk over to the hostess, a young woman with a clipboard and a practiced smile. "Hi, I'm Della Raines, from Logistics?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She ran her finger down the list, her brow furrowed. She looked up, her smile becoming a little more strained, a little more pitying. "I'm sorry, I don't see your name here." My heart sank, a familiar heavy stone in my chest. Just then, Camber Sloan, the head of human resources, swept past, her perfume leaving a suffocating trail. She paused, giving me a look that was equal parts condescension and annoyance. "Oh, Della," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "The dinner is for key personnel. This isn't a daycare, you know. We can't just invite everyone." The words hit me like a slap. This isn't a daycare. The implication was clear. I was a mother, therefore I was not key personnel. My responsibilities outside this ballroom somehow made me less of a professional within it. I felt my face flush, a hot, shameful wave of color. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I mumbled something, an apology maybe, and retreated back toward the wilting canapé table. A few feet away, Jacob Ram, the VP of sales, was holding court. He'd had too much champagne, and his voice was loud, his laughter a booming, obnoxious sound. He caught my eye and gestured toward me with his glass. "Hey, you know," he slurred to his audience, "I bet her kid eats more in a week than she earns in a month." A wave of cruel, sharp laughter rippled through the group. They didn't even try to hide it. They laughed in my face, their amusement feeding on my humiliation. That was it. I couldn't take any more. The glittering lights felt blinding, the music a discordant clang. I turned and walked, not to the exit, but to the one place I knew would be empty, the employee break room on the service floor. The transition was jarring. One moment I was in a world of velvet and crystal, the next I was in a small, sterile room with a vending machine and cheap formica tables. The festive music was a muffled, thumping bass line through the walls. I sat down at one of the tables, the cold plastic a shock through my thin dress, and I finally let the tears come. They weren't loud, dramatic sobs. They were the quiet, shaking, hopeless tears of someone who was utterly defeated. I cried for my son, who deserved more than a perpetually exhausted mother. I cried for myself, for the dignity that had been stripped away from me, piece by painful piece. As I sat there, trying to muffle my sobs into a paper napkin, the door to the break room swung slightly open. I froze, holding my breath. I heard voices from the hallway, hushed but clear. It was Fiona. "Is Della still around?" someone asked. Fiona's voice was sharp, dismissive, laced with an irritation that cut me to the bone. "Who cares? She's a nobody. Just a charity case. Camber keeps around to meet some diversity quota. Honestly, it's embarrassing." The door swung shut, and the voices faded away. A nobody. The word echoed in the silent, cold room. It settled over me, a final, crushing weight. They didn't just dislike me. They didn't just exclude me. To them, I didn't even exist. I was a zero, a ghost. In that moment, sitting alone in the break room, while my colleagues danced and drank and celebrated their success, something inside me didn't just break, it shattered. The following Monday, the office was a minefield of feigned cheerfulness and mocking sympathy. The same people who had laughed in my face at the party now offered me hollow greetings, their eyes filled with a pity that felt more like contempt. The cheap tinsel and wilting wreaths still hanging in the cubicles felt like decorations at a funeral. My funeral. I sat at my desk, a small gray box in the vast open-plan tundra of the logistics department, and tried to disappear into my monitor. But every flicker of the screen, every email notification, felt like an accusation. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could hear the whispers that stopped abruptly whenever I walked past the coffee machine. My dignity was in tatters, a shredded garment I was forced to wear every single day. The humiliation was a constant, bitter taste in the back of my throat. But shame doesn't pay the bills. Back home, my reality was a stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter, each one a stark, unforgiving reminder of my failure. The rent was late. The electric company was threatening to shut off our power. The most terrifying bill of all was from the pharmacy. My son, Leo, had asthma, and the new inhaler his doctor prescribed was a brand-name medication our insurance barely covered. $280. It might as well have been $1 million. I stared at the bill, the number blurring through my tears. I was working a full-time job, taking extra night shifts whenever I could get them, and I still couldn't afford the medicine my child needed to breathe. The feeling of helplessness was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard for me to breathe too. I was trapped. This job, this soul-crushing, humiliating job, was the only thing keeping us from being out on the street. But staying felt like dying a slow death every single day. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened a new email, my fingers shaking as I typed out my resignation. I wrote about needing to pursue other opportunities, the standard corporate lie. I poured all my frustration and despair into that draft, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and relief. I hovered my cursor over the send button, my finger trembling. Just one click, and it would be over. No more Fiona. No more Jacob. No more pitying looks from Camber. But then the image of the pharmacy bill flashed in my mind. The image of Leo's small, trusting face. Where would we go? What would we do? The relief of quitting would be immediately replaced by the sheer panic of having no income at all. I couldn't do it. I couldn't fail my son like that. With a sob of utter defeat, I deleted the draft. I felt like a prisoner who had just thrown away the key to her own cell. That night, after Leo was asleep, I sat in the dark of my living room, scrolling aimlessly through my old work emails, a form of self-punishment. I was looking for nothing in particular, just letting the wave of professional mediocrity wash over me. And then I saw it. An email from over a year ago. The sender's name was Miriam Duval. Miriam had been the original founder of the company, a self-made, notoriously tough CEO who had retired a few years back. She had done a walkthrough of the logistics department once, and for some reason, she had stopped at my desk. She'd asked me a few sharp, intelligent questions about workflow inefficiencies. I'd answered them honestly, pointing out bottlenecks that everyone else ignored. She had listened, her gaze intense, and just before she left, she had sent me a follow-up email. It was short, almost curt. It said, "You have a good head on your shoulders, Della. Don't let them grind it down. Smart girls just need a bigger toolbox." At the time, I had been flattered but had dismissed it. It was just a nice comment from a passing executive. But now, sitting in the darkness with my world crumbling around me, the words hit me with the force of a revelation. A bigger toolbox. A spark ignited in the cold, dead ashes of my spirit. It was a tiny, fragile thing, but it was there, a spark of an idea. A spark of defiance. Maybe I didn't need to quit. Maybe I just needed a bigger toolbox. The spark was small, but it was enough to light a fire. That night, sitting at my cheap kitchen table, with the glow of my laptop screen illuminating my determined face, I began my campaign. I drafted an email to Miriam Duval. It wasn't a plea for help, it was a statement of intent. I kept it professional, concise, and respectful. I reminded her of our brief meeting, quoted her own words back to her about needing a bigger toolbox, and I stated that I was ready to build one. I told her I was willing to do whatever it took. I hit send, my heart hammering against my ribs. The next night, after my shift, I sent another, and another the night after that. For 10 straight days, I sent a single, polite, persistent email into the void, each one a small act of faith. I expected to be ignored. I expected a curt reply from an assistant telling me to stop. What I did not expect was the email that landed in my inbox on the 11th day, just after midnight. It was from her. The message was 5 words long. "Meet me Thursday at 6 a.m. Below it was the address of an all-night diner halfway across town. There was no salutation, no pleasantries, just a command: "Don't be late." A jolt of adrenaline and terror shot through me. On Thursday morning, I was up at 4, my mind racing. I arranged for my neighbor to listen for Leo, got dressed in the dark, and drove through the silent, pre-dawn streets. The diner was a classic slice of Americana, all chrome and cracked red vinyl. I saw her immediately, sitting in a booth in the corner, a newspaper spread out before her, a cup of black coffee steaming at her elbow. Miriam Duval in person was even more formidable than I remembered. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. She didn't smile as I slid into the booth opposite her. She just folded her paper and watched me. "You're 5 minutes early," she said. It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. "I can offer you mentorship, Della," she began, getting straight to the point. "But let's be clear, this isn't a charity. I don't give handouts. I invest in people I think have potential, and I expect a return on my investment. That return is your success. If you're not serious, if you're going to waste my time with excuses or half measures, we can end this conversation right now, and you can go back to being a ghost in that office." Her words were blunt, almost brutal, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. "I'm serious," I said, my voice steady. "Good." She took a sip of her coffee. "Your first assignment is to enroll in a business course. Something online, something you can manage around your schedule. I don't care if it's from a community college or an Ivy League extension school. I want you to learn the language of money, assets, liabilities, profit and loss. Understand it. Breathe it." That very day, I enrolled in a part-time online business fundamentals course at the local community college. The nights became a blur of exhaustion. I'd work my shift at the logistics center, come home, tuck Leo into bed, and then with my eyelids feeling like they were lined with sand, I'd open my textbook. The concepts were foreign, dense. I was drowning in a sea of spreadsheets and marketing jargon. But with every chapter I finished, I felt a little stronger, a little more capable. A week later, Miriam called. "How's the course?" she asked. No preamble. "It's a lot," I admitted. "Good, it should be. Now for your second assignment." I braced myself. "I want you to make $1 online. Just one. I don't care how you do it. Sell something. Offer a service. Do a survey. Build something small, from nothing, and get someone to pay you for it. Make $1. That's it. Call me when you've done it." She hung up. I stared at the phone, bewildered. $1. After all the talk of assets and liabilities, my grand mission was to make a single dollar. It seemed almost insulting. But as I thought about it, I understood. She wasn't asking me to build an empire overnight. She was asking me to take the first terrifying step, to prove to myself that I could create value, however small, out of thin air. The goal wasn't the dollar. The goal was the proof. The challenge of making a single dollar felt both ridiculously simple and impossibly complex. My mind, still swimming with theories from my business course, immediately went to products. I needed to sell something. Thinking of my son Leo and his love for puzzles and building blocks, I landed on the idea of educational toys for children. It felt authentic, something I could genuinely get behind. I spent hours researching dropshipping, a business model that seemed like a miracle. I wouldn't have to hold any inventory. I'd just be the middleman. I used a free website builder to create a simple, cheerful-looking online store. I found a supplier on a sprawling e-commerce platform who had a warehouse full of colorful wooden toys. It felt real. It felt like a business. My first order came a week later. I was ecstatic. Someone had actually paid me $25 for a set of alphabet blocks. I quickly placed the order with my supplier, my hands trembling with excitement. This was it. I had done it. But the initial thrill quickly curdled into a nightmare. The package never arrived. My customer understandably grew impatient, then angry. Her emails shifted from polite inquiries to capitalized demands for a refund. I sent frantic messages to the supplier, who replied in broken English, assuring me the package was on the way. It wasn't. 2 more orders came in, and the same thing happened. One package arrived after 6 weeks, crushed and damaged. The other vanished into the ether of international shipping. The refund requests piled up, draining my tiny, precarious bank account. I was losing money I didn't have. The dream of a thriving toy store was becoming a swamp of customer service complaints and financial stress. I sat staring at my laptop one night, the screen filled with angry emails and negative balances, feeling like a complete fool. The voices of my coworkers echoed in my head. She's a nobody. A charity case. Maybe they were right. I was about to shut it all down, to admit defeat and crawl back into my box, when I took a break and scrolled through a local parents group on social media. I saw a post from the owner of a small independent daycare center a few towns over. She was venting, writing about how she was drowning in administrative work. She loved the kids, she wrote, but hated the paperwork, the scheduling, the billing. A light bulb went off in my head. I wasn't good at selling physical things, at the mercy of suppliers and shipping companies, but I was good at logistics. It was literally my job title. I knew how to create efficient systems. I knew how to manage schedules and track information. I spent the next hour crafting a careful, professional message to the daycare owner. I didn't try to sell her anything. I just sympathized with her problem and briefly mentioned my professional background in logistics and administration. I offered to chat for 15 minutes for free to see if I could offer any simple suggestions. She replied within the hour. We had a video call the next day. I was so nervous my voice shook, but as I started talking about creating simple, automated spreadsheets for billing and using free online calendars for parent-teacher scheduling, my confidence grew. I was in my element. At the end of the call, she looked relieved. "This is amazing," she said. "I would pay someone to do this for me. I just don't have the time." My heart leaped. "I could do it," I blurted out. "I could set it all up for you. For $200. I held my breath, convinced I had asked for too much. She didn't even hesitate. "It's a deal." That evening, a notification popped up on my phone. A payment of $200 had been deposited into my account. I stared at it, my eyes welling up. It wasn't just money, it was validation. It was the first real taste of hope I'd had in years. I had failed at selling toys, but I had succeeded at selling myself, my skills, my knowledge. I picked up my phone and called Miriam. "I did it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I made my dollar." The $200 was more than just money. It was a blueprint. I had found my niche. My life settled into a new grueling rhythm, a secret double life conducted in the dead of night. My day job in logistics was the mask I wore, the tedious but necessary role that kept a roof over our heads. But my real work began after I tucked Leo into bed. From 2 in the morning until 6, the quiet hours belonged to me. My tiny apartment, bathed in the cool glow of a single laptop screen, became the headquarters of Deloraine's Consulting. I was a ghost, not just at the office, but in my own home, tiptoeing around so as not to wake my sleeping son. His steady breathing from the next room was the fuel that kept me going, the constant reminder of what I was fighting for. I became a master of frugality and resourcefulness. My business was built on the free tiers of online services. I conducted client meetings on a Zoom account that would unceremoniously boot us after 40 minutes. I drafted professional proposals and contracts using Google Docs and free templates I found online. My primary marketing tool was LinkedIn, where I spent hours crafting direct messages to other small business owners, mostly women, who ran daycares, tutoring centers, or local craft shops. I spoke their language of being overwhelmed and under-resourced. My first client, the daycare owner, was so thrilled with my work that she gave me a glowing testimonial. That single piece of social proof was gold. I used it to land 3 more clients within a month. A small tutoring service that needed help with scheduling, a home bakery struggling to track orders, a yoga studio that wanted to streamline its class sign-ups. Each new contract was another brick in the foundation of my new life, a life built in silence and shadow. The exhaustion was bone deep, a constant companion. There were mornings I'd be in the middle of a client call at 5:30 a.m., then have to splash cold water on my face, change into my bland office attire, and paste on a smile to face a day of being ignored and patronized at my real job. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. In one world, I was a competent, respected consultant. In the other, I was the poor single mom from logistics. The strain began to show. I was losing weight, there were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and people at work started to notice. One afternoon, Brandon Voss, the operations manager, stopped by my desk. Brandon was a company lifer, a man in his late 50s who was just trying to make it to retirement without rocking the boat. He was never cruel to me like Fiona or Jacob, but he was never an ally either. He was a creature of calculated neutrality. "Della," he said, his voice low, his eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. "You look tired. Everything okay?" "I'm fine, Brandon," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on." He leaned in closer, his expression a mixture of concern and fear. "Listen, I'm telling you this as a friend. People are talking. You seem distracted. You look like you're burning the candle at both ends. Fiona's been making comments to management." He wrung his hands, a nervous, habitual gesture. "You've got a good, stable job here, Della. Don't do anything to jeopardize that. You've got a kid to think about." His words were meant as a kindness, a warning from a concerned colleague, but all I heard was a threat. He was telling me to stay in my box, to remember my place. The implication was clear. I was already on thin ice, and if I didn't perform my role as the meek, grateful employee to perfection, I could lose everything. I felt a flash of anger, but I quickly suppressed it. I couldn't afford to be angry. I just nodded. "Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate you looking out for me." He nodded, satisfied, and scurried away. I turned back to my screen, my heart pounding. His warning had the opposite of its intended effect. It didn't make me want to scale back. It made me realize I had to work even harder, even faster. The secret life I was building wasn't just a side project anymore. It was my only way out. My consulting business was growing, but it was fragile. I was trading hours for dollars, and I was running out of hours in the day. I was hitting a ceiling, and I knew it. When I explained this to Miriam during our next check-in, she listened patiently, her expression unreadable over the grainy video call. I expected advice on time management or pricing strategies. Instead, she threw me a curveball that knocked the wind out of me. "I'm going to offer you a loan," she said, her voice flat and businesslike. $5,000. "It's not a gift, it's a test. Your task is to double it in 3 months. Turn this 5,000 into 10,000. If you succeed, the money is yours to reinvest. If you fail, you pay me back every cent with 10% interest." I was stunned into silence. $5,000 was a fortune. It was more money than I had ever seen in one place. The thought of being responsible for it, of potentially having to pay it back with interest I couldn't afford, was terrifying. But the thought of what I could do with it was intoxicating. "This is how you scale, Della," Miriam continued, as if reading my mind. "You stop being the engine and you start building a machine. You use capital to create something that makes money while you sleep. This is your chance to stop being a freelancer and start being a founder." I accepted. The weight of that decision settled on me immediately. For 2 sleepless nights, I agonized over how to use the money. I could spend it on marketing, on a fancy website, on a co-working space to seem more legitimate. But those were expenses, not investments. They wouldn't build a machine. Then, the idea hit me. The core of my service was creating systems, spreadsheets, calendars, intake forms. What if I could turn those systems into a product? What if I could build a simple, all-in-one software platform specifically designed for the small, service-based businesses I was helping? It was a huge risk. I knew nothing about software development, but it was the only idea that felt like it could truly scale. Following Miriam's advice, I didn't hire an expensive local firm. I spent a week on freelance platforms, vetting and interviewing small, independent software development teams in Southeast Asia. I found a promising team of 3, talented, hungry, and affordable. I used the $5,000 to hire them for a 3-month contract. The process was a chaotic, frustrating, and exhilarating education. There were late-night calls navigating time zone differences and language barriers. The first version of the software was a buggy, barely functional mess. There were moments I was certain I had just thrown Miriam's money into a digital black hole. I was on the verge of panic, the 3-month deadline looming, when I decided to try a different tactic. Instead of waiting for the product to be perfect, I needed to see if anyone even wanted it. I wrote a long, detailed post on LinkedIn. I didn't try to sell the software. I wrote about the 5 biggest administrative headaches that plague small business owners, using the exact language my clients had used with me. I wrote about the pain of chasing invoices, the chaos of scheduling, the black hole of customer data. At the very end, I added a single sentence. I'm building a simple tool to solve these problems. If you're interested in being a beta tester, let me know. I posted it and walked away, my stomach in knots. The next morning, I woke up to an avalanche of notifications. The post had been shared dozens of times. It was resonating with my target audience in a way I never could have imagined. And in my inbox, there were 15 messages from business owners, all asking how they could sign up. 15 inbound leads from one single post. My hands were shaking as I called Miriam. I explained the buggy software, the LinkedIn post, the 15 leads. I waited for her judgment. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, I heard a sound I'd never heard from her before, a low, satisfied chuckle. "You didn't just build a product, Della," she said, her voice filled with a rare warmth. "You found a market. You passed the test. You're ready." With the new leads and Miriam's validation, my confidence soared. I was finally building something real, something with momentum. But just as I felt myself gaining altitude, the universe presented a test of a different kind, a moral one. One of my first and biggest clients was a woman named Sarah, who ran a chain of after-school tutoring centers. We had been friends in college, losing touch over the years until she saw one of my posts and reached out for help. My systems had helped her streamline her operations, and she had become my most vocal supporter. One afternoon she called me, her voice buzzing with an excitement that made me uneasy. "Della, I have a massive opportunity for us," she said. She explained that she was applying for a large government grant aimed at supporting educational programs in underserved communities. A successful application would mean a huge influx of cash for her business. "Here's the thing," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The grant heavily favors programs with a proven track record of high student engagement. Our numbers are good, but they're not stellar. I need you to work your magic on the data. We just need to inflate the engagement metrics a little, tweak the attendance records, adjust the test score improvements. Nothing crazy, just enough to get us over the line." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. She was asking me to fake the data, to lie. "If we get this grant," she continued, sensing my hesitation, "there's a $10,000 bonus in it for you. Think of what you could do with that, Della, for you and your son." $10,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering with temptation. It was more than I made in 3 months at my logistics job. It would pay for Leo's medication for years. It would mean a security deposit on a better apartment, a real emergency fund, a chance to finally breathe. For 2 days I was in turmoil. I drafted the falsified report, my fingers feeling clumsy and foreign on the keyboard. I told myself it was just a small lie, a white lie. I was helping a good program get the funding it deserved. I was helping kids. I was helping myself. The ends, I reasoned, justified the means. I was rationalizing, bargaining with my own conscience, and losing the battle. That evening, I was working on the report at the kitchen table, after putting Leo to bed. He couldn't sleep and padded out into the living room, rubbing his eyes. He walked over and peered at my laptop screen, at the spreadsheets with their columns of fabricated numbers. He couldn't understand what he was looking at, of course, but he saw the tense look on my face. "What are you doing, Mommy?" he asked, his voice sleepy and innocent. I tried to smile. "Just some work, sweetie." He pointed a small finger at the screen. "Is that how we get rich? By doing that work?" His question, so simple and guileless, was like a dagger to the heart. It sliced through all my carefully constructed justifications and exposed the ugly truth of what I was doing. I was teaching my son that lying was the path to success. I looked from his trusting face to the screen full of lies. In that moment, the $10,000 felt like the dirtiest money in the world. What was the point of building a better life for him if I had to destroy my own integrity to do it? I closed the laptop. "No, baby," I said, my voice thick. "That's not how we get rich." I scooped him up and carried him back to bed. Once he was asleep, I returned to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and dragged the falsified report into the trash bin. I emptied the trash. Then I wrote 2 emails. The first was to Sarah, telling her I could not fulfill her request and that I was terminating our contract, effective immediately. The second, and much harder email, was to the Grant Foundation, anonymously reporting her attempt to submit fraudulent data. I hit send on both, and a profound sense of peace washed over me. I had lost my biggest client. I had lost the promise of $10,000, but I had reclaimed my self-respect. That night, for the first time in a long, long time, I slept soundly. The universe, it seems, abhors a vacuum. The space left by my newfound peace was quickly filled with corporate retaliation. My decision to report Sarah, while morally right, had unforeseen consequences. She was furious and felt betrayed, and in her anger, she started talking. She told a mutual acquaintance that I was running a shady side business, and like a virus, the information spread through the gossipy network that connects everyone in a city, eventually finding its way back to the one place I didn't want it, my office. The atmosphere, which had been merely cold, turned actively hostile. The whispers were no longer behind my back, they were just out of earshot, accompanied by pointed stares and sudden silences when I approached. Fiona Leeds, in particular, seemed to take a gleeful, predatory interest in my discomfort. The blow I had been dreading finally landed on a Tuesday afternoon. An email notification popped up, its subject line innocuous, Reg Q4 Logistics Workflow, but the list of recipients made my blood run cold. Fiona had sent a question about a shipping manifest, a mundane, everyday query, but she had accidentally CC'd the entire executive team, including the CEO, the COO, and Jacob Ram, and at the bottom of the email, she had added a postscript, a little digital shiv designed to gut me publicly. P.S. It read, "On a separate note, can we all give a round of applause to Della for her entrepreneurial spirit? I've heard she's running a rather successful consulting business in her spare time. Just want to make sure the executive team is aware of Della's extracurricular activities. Hope it's not interfering with her actual job here." The faux cheerfulness of it, the carefully placed exclamation points, made it all the more venomous. It was a declaration of war. An hour later, I received the summons. "Please come to the main HR conference room immediately." My heart hammered against my ribs as I made the long walk across the office. When I entered, they were all there, arranged like a tribunal. Camber Sloane sat at the head of the table, her face a mask of feigned professional concern. Fiona was there, looking smug. And next to her, looking deeply uncomfortable and avoiding my gaze, was Brandon Voss. "Della, thanks for joining us," Camber began, her voice smooth as silk. "It has come to our attention that you may be engaged in outside employment. As you know, our company policy requires full disclosure of any such activities to avoid conflicts of interest." Fiona chimed in, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We're just concerned, Della. Your performance has seemed a bit lackluster lately. We want to make sure you're focused." I wanted to scream. My performance hadn't slipped. I had never missed a deadline. I had worked harder than anyone in that department, fueled by desperation and coffee. But I knew arguing was pointless. This wasn't a conversation, it was a sentencing. I looked at Brandon, my last hope for a neutral party, for a voice of reason. He wouldn't meet my eye. He just stared at a spot on the polished table. "Della," he mumbled, his voice weak and shaky. "Given the circumstances, we're reviewing your role here." Camber delivered the final blow. "Effective immediately. You're being placed on paid administrative leave, pending a full review of the situation. Please hand over your ID badge." Numbly, I unclipped the badge from my belt and slid it across the table. The plastic card, with my smiling photo and my name, felt like a part of my identity being stripped away. "Your access to company systems will be deactivated," Camber continued, her voice devoid of any emotion. "We'll be in touch." The walk out of that building was the longest of my life. I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on me as I gathered my purse and my coat, a public shaming orchestrated to perfection. When I got home, I tried to log into the payroll system to see when my last paycheck would be deposited. My access was denied. They had locked me out of everything. I was unemployed, my income cut off, and my reputation in tatters. I had hit rock bottom. Again. But this time was different. This time, as I sat staring at the access denied message, I wasn't just filled with despair. I was filled with a cold, clear, calculating rage. They thought they had fired me. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who had finally learned how to fight back. Being locked out was supposed to break me. It was meant to be the final humiliation, the act that sent me scurrying back into poverty and obscurity. But as I sat in my small apartment, the silence buzzing around me, I realized something. They hadn't just taken my job, they had given me the gift of time. All those hours I had spent commuting, sitting in a gray cubicle, and enduring their contempt were now mine, and I knew exactly what to do with them. My first call was to Miriam. I explained everything, my voice calm and steady, detailing Fiona's email and Camber's pre-written verdict. I expected sympathy or anger on my behalf. Instead, her response was sharp and pragmatic. "Good," she said. "They've shown their hand. Being a consultant was step 1, now you have the time for step 2. Stop thinking about selling your time. It's time to sell the machine you built." The machine. My buggy but promising software, the system I had developed for my clients. The leads from my LinkedIn post were still trickling in. I had a proven concept and a hungry market. I spent the next week doing nothing but refining my business plan. I wasn't just selling software anymore, I was selling a complete turnkey administrative solution for small businesses, a business in a box for people who were great at their craft but terrible at the paperwork. Miriam made a few calls. She got me a meeting, not with a bank, not with an angel investor, but with a small, aggressive venture capital-backed company that specialized in acquiring promising tech startups. The meeting was in a sleek downtown office that made my old workplace look like a community center. I was terrified, but as I began my presentation, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't Della, the logistics coordinator, anymore. I was the founder and CEO of a company. I knew my product, I knew my market, and I knew my worth. I laid out the problem, the solution, and the path to profitability. They peppered me with questions, testing for weaknesses, but I had an answer for everything. At the end of the meeting, the lead partner, a woman with eyes as sharp as Miriam's, made me an offer. They wanted to acquire my systems, my code, and my client list. But instead of a simple cash buyout, she offered something far more valuable. She offered me a significant block of stock in one of their shell companies. It was a holding firm, she explained, a legal entity they used to acquire divisions of larger, struggling corporations. It was an unusual deal, but I understood the strategy immediately. Thanks to Miriam's coaching, cash was temporary, ownership was power. I accepted the deal. With the contract signed, I was suddenly an insider. I had access to a level of financial information I never could have dreamed of, and I started digging. I asked the holding firm to pull the financials on my old company, Apex Industries. As I pored over the quarterly reports, my heart began to race. The company as a whole was stable, but my old division, the one managed by the same people who had tormented me, was hemorrhaging money, bloated expense accounts, underperforming sales teams, and inefficient workflows were draining it dry. It was a liability, a diseased limb on an otherwise healthy body. It was ripe for a takeover. I went back to Miriam with the data. We sat at her kitchen table, spreadsheets and reports covering every surface. "They're vulnerable," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Extremely," she agreed, a grim smile on her face. "The parent company will be looking to offload this division to stop the bleeding. They'll sell it for pennies on the dollar to anyone willing to take it off their hands." Over the next 2 weeks, we worked quietly, methodically, using the resources of the holding firm and a significant portion of my newfound capital. We began to buy shares of Apex Industries, specifically earmarking them for control of the failing logistics division. It wasn't a dramatic hostile takeover. It was a quiet, relentless acquisition, happening in the silent world of stock transfers and legal filings. No one at my old office had a clue. They were too busy celebrating their victory over the single mom from logistics. 2 weeks ago, they had taken my $100 a day job. Today, I had just finished signing the final papers that gave me a 52% controlling stake in their entire multi-million-dollar division. The quiet satisfaction was a feeling more powerful than any rage. It was the feeling of checkmate. The email arrived on a Friday morning, exactly 3 weeks after I had been forced to walk out of the office in disgrace. It was from a sender I didn't recognize, someone in the corporate legal department of Apex Industries' head office. The subject line was stark: mandatory restructuring meeting. My breath caught in my throat. I read the short, formal message. All senior management and department heads of the logistics division were required to attend a meeting the following Wednesday. The purpose was to introduce the new leadership and discuss the division's future direction. It was happening. They were calling the meeting to announce the acquisition. I immediately forwarded the email to Miriam, my hands shaking slightly. My phone rang less than a minute later. "It's time," was all she said. "They know the division has been acquired, but they don't know by whom. They'll be expecting a man in a suit from some big, faceless investment firm in New York. They have absolutely no idea it's you." "What do I do?" I asked, my mind a whirlwind of triumph and anxiety. "How do I handle this?" "You handle it by remembering who you are." Miriam's voice was firm, a steel rod in the chaos of my emotions. "You are not the woman they kicked out. You are the woman who owns the room they're sitting in. But they don't know that yet. The shock will be your greatest weapon. Use it." Then she gave me a piece of advice that was so counterintuitive, yet so brilliant, I almost laughed. "Don't go in there looking like their boss," she said. "Go in there looking like Della Raines from Logistics. The woman they remember. The woman they underestimated. Wear something simple. Let them see you, and think nothing of it. Let them make their jokes. Let them dig their own graves. Make sure that when the truth hits, they remember exactly who they were talking about." The strategy was perfect. It was a power move disguised as weakness. For the next few days, I prepared. I went over the division's financials until I knew them by heart. I identified every redundancy, every bloated budget, every stream of wasted revenue. I drafted a plan, a new organizational chart, a list of actions to be taken. I was no longer operating on emotion. I was a surgeon, preparing to cut out a cancer. On the morning of the meeting, I stood in front of my closet. I bypassed the new expensive power suits I had bought. Instead, I pulled out a simple beige blouse and a pair of plain black trousers, the outfit I would have worn on any given Tuesday at my old job. Sensible, forgettable. I did my makeup simply, pulled my hair back into a neat, unassuming ponytail. Looking in the mirror, I saw her. The woman they all thought they knew. The poor single mom. The charity case. The nobody. But her eyes were different. There was a cold, calm fire in them now. A focus. I was walking back into the lion's den, but this time, I wasn't the prey. I was the hunter, disguised as a lamb, and I was about to remind them what happens when you corner an animal you think is helpless. I arrived at the office building and walked through the lobby, a place that once filled me with a sense of dread. Today, it felt different. It felt smaller. I took the elevator up to the executive floor. As I stepped out, the familiar hush of the carpeted hallways greeted me. I could hear the low murmur of voices from the glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall. I paused outside the door for a moment, composing myself, clutching the simple manila folder in my hand. Then, I walked in. Just as Miriam predicted, no one paid me any real attention. A few heads turned, saw me, and dismissed me instantly. I saw a flicker of confusion on a few faces, quickly replaced by assumptions. They probably thought I had been called back to be officially fired in person, or perhaps to answer some lingering logistical question. I took a seat at the far end of the long, polished table, away from the main cluster of executives, and quietly observed. The air in the room was thick with nervous energy and bravado. They knew a change was coming, but their arrogance blinded them to its true nature. Jacob Ram was leaning back in his chair, feet propped up on an empty one, boasting about a recent sales deal. "Doesn't matter who this new GM is," he said loudly. "As long as they know who brings in the money, they won't touch my team." Camber Sloan, ever the political operator, was nodding along. "The key is to manage expectations from the start," she said, sounding like she was quoting from a textbook. We just need to show them how things are done around here. But it was Fiona Leeds who delivered the line that sealed her own fate. She glanced down the table in my direction, a smirk playing on her lips. She didn't speak to me, but about me, for the benefit of those around her. I just hope corporate didn't send us another softie, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. If it's another charity case like Della, this whole division is doomed. A few people chuckled uneasily. Brandon Voss, I noticed, sat silently, staring at his hands, his face pale. He looked like a man already attending a funeral. At that moment, the door opened and a woman I didn't recognize walked in. She was sharp, dressed in a severe gray suit, and carried a leather portfolio. She sat at the head of the table. "Good morning," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "I am Layla Moon, from the corporate legal department. Thank you all for coming. We can now begin." A hush fell over the room. Layla opened her portfolio. "As you have been made aware, Apex Industries has approved the acquisition of this division by a private holding firm. Your operational budget and reporting structure will change, effective today. The first order of business is to introduce you to your new general manager." The tension in the room was palpable. Jacob took his feet off the chair. Fiona sat up straighter. Camber pasted on a welcoming smile. They all looked toward the door, expecting a stranger to walk in. Layla Moon did not look toward the door. Her eyes scanned the faces at the table. And then, deliberately, she looked directly at me. "Let's begin," she said again, her voice cutting through the silence. "Your new general manager is Miss Della Raines." For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. It was as if Layla had spoken in a foreign language. The executives looked at her, then at me, their faces blank with incomprehension. Then, the pieces started to click into place. I watched as Fiona's smug smirk dissolved, her jaw slackening, as if the muscles had been cut. Her face went from confused to horrified. Jacob Rahm's face, usually ruddy with confidence, drained of all color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. And Camber Sloane, Camber's hand, which was raising her coffee cup to her lips, slipped. The white ceramic cup clattered against its saucer, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. A dark splash of coffee stained the white tablecloth. No one moved, no one spoke. They just stared at me, the nobody, the charity case, as I slowly, deliberately rose to my feet. I stood up, the simple fabric of my blouse a stark contrast to the power that was now radiating from me. I walked from my seat at the end of the table to the head, to the seat that Layla Moon had left empty for me. The sound of my sensible shoes on the floor was unnervingly loud in the dead silence. I placed my single manila folder on the polished wood with a soft, definitive thud. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My very presence at the head of this table was a scream. I looked at the stunned faces before me, the architects of my past humiliation, and I felt nothing. No anger. No desire for petty revenge, just a cold, clear sense of purpose. This was not personal. This was business. I opened the folder. "Good morning," I said, my voice even and calm. It was the same voice I used on client calls, the voice of a competent professional. "As Ms. Moon stated, I am the new general manager of this division." I slid the first document across the table. It was the top page of the acquisition agreement, a dense block of legal text. But at the bottom, my name was clearly visible, signed above the title, Managing Partner. I let them stare at it for a moment, letting the reality sink in. I saw Fiona's eyes scan the page, her breath catching in a small, choked gasp. Jacob wouldn't even look at it, he just stared at me, his expression one of pure disbelief. I then pulled out the second set of papers. "Before we discuss the future," I said, "we need to understand the past." I slid a performance report toward Jacob. "Jacob, this report details your sales team's performance over the last 2 fiscal years. It shows that while sales have been flat, your team's travel and entertainment budget has increased by 60%. It also details a client relations trip to Las Vegas that cost this company $42,000 and resulted in 0 new contracts." I turned to Camber. I slid another report in front of her. "Camber, this is an analysis of the bonus scheme you designed and implemented. It shows that 92% of all bonuses were paid out to the sales and management departments, while support staff, like logistics, received less than 1%. This scheme has fostered resentment, destroyed morale, and directly contributed to a 20% annual turnover rate in our highest performing operational staff. Finally, I looked at Fiona. I didn't even give her a paper. I just met her gaze. Her face was ashen. "And Fiona," I said, my voice remaining perfectly level, "your team has missed its core efficiency targets for 6 consecutive quarters. Instead of addressing the issues, you have spent your time, on company equipment and on company time, sending emails that mock and undermine your colleagues." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. They had nowhere to hide. I had the data. I had the facts. "This is not a debate," I stated, my eyes sweeping the room. "These are the facts that have led this division to the brink of collapse, and my first act as general manager is to stop the bleeding." I looked directly at Fiona. "Fiona, your position as team lead is redundant. Your contributions are no longer required. HR will process your severance package and escort you from the building. Please gather your personal belongings." I then turned to Camber. "Camber, you are being demoted from head of human resources. Your new role will be in records archival, a non-management position, located in the basement annex. Your performance in that role will determine your future with this company." Jacob started to speak, to bluster, but I cut him off. "Jacob, the useless bonus scheme is terminated, effective immediately. Your team's expense accounts are frozen. All expenditures will now require my personal pre-approved signature." Throughout it all, Layla Moon, the lawyer, sat perfectly still, her hands folded. She was the neutral observer, the witness. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not surprise, not pity, but a quiet, sharp assessment. It might have been respect. I had not come back for revenge. I had come back for accountability, and it had just been delivered. The meeting ended as abruptly as it began. Fiona, for once in her life, was speechless. She was escorted out by a security guard Leela had waiting in the hall, her face a mask of disbelief. Jacob sat slumped in his chair, all the air gone out of him. Camber looked like she wanted to argue, but one look from me and she simply nodded, her expression grim. The rest of the managers filed out of the room in a state of shock, avoiding my eyes. Only 2 people remained, me and Brandon Voss. He stood by the door, wringing his hands, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. He approached my end of the table hesitantly, like a man approaching a judge to hear his sentence. "Della," he started, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry for everything. I always knew you were smart, but I was afraid." He looked down at his shoes. "I'm close to retirement, my pension." I listened without interrupting. When he was finished, I looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of sad clarity. I could have torn into him. I could have reminded him of every time he chose silence, every time he saw injustice and looked away to protect himself. But what was the point? He knew what he had done, or rather, what he hadn't done. I cut him off, but gently. "You knew, Brandon," I said, my voice soft but firm. "And you stayed quiet." The simple truth of that statement was more damning than any accusation I could have leveled. There was nothing more to say. He understood, his shoulders sagged in defeat. "I'll submit my resignation this afternoon," he said, and walked out of the room, a man finally facing the consequences of his own cowardice. He wasn't fired, he was simply rendered irrelevant by his own inaction. That evening, as I sat alone in my new office, Fiona's old office, with its panoramic view, my phone rang. It was Miriam. "I heard it was a productive day," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It was," I said, looking out at the city lights twinkling to life. "Brandon Voss resigned." "Of course he did," Miriam said. "He's not a bad man, Della, he's just a weak one. And when the landscape changes, the weak get washed away. What you delivered today wasn't just revenge, it was accountability. That's what real power feels like." We talked for a few more minutes, and then I hung up, a sense of profound finality settling over me. The war was over. Now the work of building began. I turned to the stack of files on my new expansive desk. The top one was a contract proposal. I picked up a heavy, expensive-looking pen from the desk set, a pen I was sure Fiona had prided herself on, and I clicked it open. The contract was for the company-wide implementation and licensing of a new administrative software platform. My software, the one I had built in the dead of night, fueled by coffee and desperation. I signed my name at the bottom, my signature clear and confident, Della Raines, General Manager. It was my first official act. I wasn't just cleaning up the past, I was creating the future. A future I had built with my own two hands, a future where my value was undeniable. The ghost of the logistics department was gone for good. The following weekend, I did something I hadn't been able to do in over a year. I completely unplugged. I rented a small rustic cabin in the mountains, a few hours out of the city. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just tall pine trees and the crisp, clean air of a world away from boardrooms and balance sheets. I took Leo. We spent the days hiking along trails, skipping stones across a clear, cold lake, and looking for animal tracks in the soft earth. In the evenings, we sat by a crackling fire, drinking hot cocoa with extra marshmallows, the warmth chasing away the mountain chill. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was everything I had been fighting for. On our last night, as we sat by the fire, Leo snuggled up beside me, his head resting on my shoulder. He was quiet for a long time, watching the flames dance. Then he looked up at me, his expression serious. "Mommy," he said, "you're the boss now." I smiled, a genuine bone-deep smile that reached my eyes. I thought about the question, about the long, painful journey that had led me to this moment of peace. The humiliation, the exhaustion, the fear, the late nights, the early mornings. The moment I almost gave up, the moment I decided to fight. "I was always the boss, sweetie," I said softly, stroking his hair. They just didn't see it. And in that moment, I knew it was the truest thing I had ever said. The title of general manager, the big office, the ownership stake, they weren't what made me powerful. They were the result of the power I had found within myself. The power to endure, to learn, to build, and to believe in my own worth when no one else did. My real promotion hadn't happened in that conference room. It had happened in the quiet of my apartment at 3 in the morning, when I landed my first $200 client. Later that night, after Leo was sound asleep in the cabin's small bedroom, I sat by the dying embers of the fire and opened my laptop. For the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a tool, an instrument of creation. I wasn't there to grind or to struggle. I was there to build. I opened my email and began typing a welcome message. I was onboarding my first new hire for a paid internship program I had created as one of my first official acts. The program was designed specifically for women re-entering the workforce or looking to pivot their careers. The first intern I had chosen was a woman I'd found through a local community group. She was bright, ambitious, and a single mother trying to build a better life for her daughter. I was giving her the chance that no one had been willing to give me. I was passing on the bigger toolbox. As I hit send, I looked out the window at the dark, silent forest. A new day was coming, a new beginning, and I was ready for it. Never underestimate a woman fighting for her child, especially not one willing to rebuild her entire life from scratch. Have you ever been underestimated and proved everyone wrong? Let me know in the comments. If this story hit home, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful revenge stories based on real emotional journeys. Thanks for watching. Stay strong, stay smart, and remember, silence is temporary. Power comes quietly.